Hey, it's History Through the Eyes of Faith, live on video. Guess what? I'm here. This is Frank, your host, Frank Range Jr., History Through the Eyes of Faith, featuring Angie Ferris.
Hello.
Angie's right there. Say some words.
Some words. I'm saying some words.
So we're happy that you're back for episode 150, part 2. Episode 150, second part of episode 150. And we're glad you're back, whether you're listening or watching, because now you can watch.
Yes. At least for now.
At least for now. We'll see. I'm recovering from a cold, so there may be some pushing away of the mic and coughing. But when it wasn't on video, that wasn't a big deal.
But now everybody's going to see you.
But now that's the deal. So we're glad you're here. And Angie, how are you?
I'm all right.
So last week, or the last episode that you listened to, we had a little technical...
You're talking about part 1? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Episode 150.
Yeah.
Part 1.
Yes.
Are all these being released at the same time?
We haven't talked about that.
So, possibly. Whoever listened to 150 might immediately be listening to this.
Yeah. Probably not, but yes.
Okay. So the point is, when we finished 150A, or 150, whatever we're calling
Part
it, Part 1, we realized, you know what, we're not going to be able to do Part 2 at that session because of some technical restraints that we discovered.
Yes.
So now we're back. And we usually, if you're just joining us, we usually like to talk a little banter, a little what's been going on in our lives. Angie is my sister. Producer Wes is here. Did I already say Producer Wes?
You didn't.
Producer Wes is here. He's right there. But he's a real thing. And he is editing and producing and doing all the stuff. So yeah, we're back. And we want to get caught up. What's going on? Do you want me to tell a story? You want to tell a story? Something going on?
You can tell a story. I've just been footballing it.
Yes.
Yes. So
well,
it was a good weekend.
It was some good college football this weekend.
Good. And we went to the first game for us in person this year.
This season?
This season, yeah.
Are you going to any more, you think?
Yeah, we've got 2 more maybe on the calendar. Or there's just a lot. Well, hopefully it'll work out.
It turns out, what are they? What
Which games?
Do you know what they are?
I think it's South Carolina, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, Georgia.
Wow.
I think those are the 2.
Well, if you can't go, there may be some folks that would want to go in your stead.
Yes.
I don't know if it's me, but it could be. I don't know. Maybe it could be one of my boys. Could be Producer Wes.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of fun down there.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
I want to comment. I have some snacks in the studio today that, an interesting thing, night before last, Ron and I went out to Arrington Vineyards to just hang out for a little bit before we went to the homecoming game at the high school, which was the last homecoming game that I have a son in the high school.
Wow.
That was Friday night. We went to that, but we went to Arrington first. And we're sitting at a little picnic table, and up walks a young lady that is our neighbor. And she walks her dogs by our house all the time. And we don't really know her. We just say hi. We're cordial. I'm going to cough.
Bless you.
And we had seen her at the Tito's where we live too. So I go, hey, how you doing? And she goes, hey. And she came over and we had a longer conversation, the 3 of us. And her boyfriend was waiting on something. And then they sat down with us and we spent 2 hours hanging out with them.
Wow.
Isn't that wild? And they have that dip. So that's why I brought the dip, because it's so good.
It's so good.
Now you need to tell a story, because I'm going to have a coughing fit real soon. I'm pushing through.
Because the dip's just making you think about it.
You need to talk.
Okay, so what to talk about? I don't know what to say. We got home really late last night. Didn't get home till 1:30 in the morning. So I'm a little bit dragging behind today. But
so if anybody's still watching.
That's the way football is.
All right.
You got to travel. Got to be there for the excitement.
Are you excited about what we're going to talk about today?
I am.
So last episode, we recapped up to about episode 28,
25.
25.
I think we got to 25. I didn't go back and looked, but that's where I think we are. So that's where we're starting.
We've got 149 episodes.
Yes.
So to kind of put into a framework.
Yes.
And we did like the first 25.
Yes, and I've been in conversations this week about the importance of history and having a multifaceted view of history. If all you have done is take history in school, then you got the perspective that was being taught at the school where you went to at that time.
Not even that.
And
the school was told what to teach.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is throughout history, that is colored by where you've taken
Decisions
history.
were made. This is our curriculum.
Yes, exactly. And how it's going to be presented. And I think we tend to think that facts are facts. We would hope that was the case, but everything is colored in the storytelling, right? So we're telling history through the eyes of a Christian believer and looking back and tracing God's hand through history. So I think that is particularly important right now, particularly important at this point in history. So that's come up in conversation several times. So as we mentioned and did earlier in the episode, we start with creation. We're coming all the way up to eventually now in our episodes that we've recorded so far up through 149, we're at the middle of the 16th century, around that period. Just
so we've got a lot
in the midst of it.
A lot has happened between the middle of the 16th century to now.
A lot has happened, built on the foundation of what happened those previous 2,000 or 3,000 years, however you want to do that. So, there's a lot to be told and a lot to understand where we came from and how we got here. And I think that, what was your experience taking history in school? Mine was more, it's just about dates and locations and wars. And
my experience was, what's going to be on the test?
Exactly. Yeah.
That, I mean, honestly, if you're in school, you just want to do well in school. You're not really, it's all, in my opinion, as an adult, is when you really have an interest in something and go learn about it.
Yeah.
In school, if you're told, you just go through the paces.
And thus we homeschooled. A lot for that reason. So that our goal in our homeschool was to have a love of learning. Not
You
just,
think it worked?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I do.
I don't, well, that's great. I just wonder if.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's not going to be true for everybody. I'm not pushing homeschooling like you have to do homeschooling if you're going to have a love of learning. I'm just saying it worked for us and our family, and that I think my kids love learning.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Well, you love learning what you're interested in.
Exactly. So, yes. So as a teacher, how do you create an interest in something so that we can learn this rather than it just being, okay, we have to do this?
Well, then, in my experience, the individual teachers that were good enough to create an interest, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But when you talk about history, I enjoy history, but it was really when I was experiencing something, like if I was in a location, like I love historical places.
Yeah.
But I'm learning more about history in this podcast than I did it probably in school. Like in college, I remember having to take Western civilization. But even then, it's not until doing this podcast that I really know what that means. Because
Yes.
Western civilization to me meant the U.S. But the Western world was Europe,
Yes.
which I really didn't put all that together.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably did over the before now, but still, it's much more clear now when we talk about the Western.
Right.
It's west of the Middle East, which is Middle East. That was the East.
And I think what I want people to see is that all of that is relevant to our life today. It's shaped our life today, and it still enters into the conversation today. A lot of the things we hear talked about in the news, we hear talked about in politics, in culture, are coming out of a certain history, and how did that history come to be what it is, and how did we get shaped the way we are, or the way our society is, and why are some parts of the world different than other parts of the world, and how are their histories different, and that kind of thing. So yeah, very relevant. And I think our country is going through a lot of changes right now. Not just our country, the world. We've talked about this 500-year thing and all that stuff. So I think it's very important to understand how we got here. So, and I think that's very relevant to the life of a faithful believer.
Yeah.
Because we'll get to that.
Which is what this podcast is about.
Right. So we're going to so the next thing I was going to say, I'm going to save for just a few minutes into the content, because I think that it'll play better there.
Well, let's get into the content.
So we got to episode 25 is entitled Year Zero. Do you remember us talking about that there wasn't a year zero?
Yeah.
And so in it, we reviewed the conditions that prepared the world for the arrival of Jesus. And we talk about the Roman Empire's network of roads, their common currency, the widespread use of Greek language, which creates this setting that is perfect for the spread of a global message. So that's kind of the thing to see with looking at history. If you're looking for God's hand, is how everything got lined up so that when Jesus shows up on the scene, all the pieces are in place for the gospel, for his message to spread rapidly throughout the civilized world. Yeah. And so that's kind of a cool thing to see. And that was in episode 25. And episode 6 was entitled, What Did Zechariah Say? And I just loved laughing at that for a long time. Do you remember that?
Because he didn't say anything.
He didn't say nothing. So we'd say, what did Zechariah say?
He didn't say nothing.
Nothing.
Because his speech was taken away.
Yeah, because he
doubted.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, that's about John the Baptist and Mary's song, the birth. I think we get to we don't quite get to the birth, but that's about the prophecy and the beginning of the time, early first century of Jesus. And then the episode 27 is Magi at the Nativity, where we talked about how the wise men actually came a year later, but we discussed Caesar's decree, the birth of Jesus, the shepherds, the wise men, that kind of thing. Then in episode 28 is Nazareth on the DL. And we talk about what it means to be from Nazareth and the prophecies.
Did we get into a little bit of theology there?
And not quite. That was a little bit more about the history of Nazareth was not a place that you wanted to be from. Mm-hmm. Okay. And
like
so
Antioch.
Yeah. Whatever. It's so anyway, there's
Antioch
a lot that goes with that.
place in the Bible.
Though. Go back and listen to episode 28 if you want to hear some funny stuff about that. But we discuss how Jesus' heritage connects him to the promises of Abraham that are given to Abraham and David. And then we touch on the hidden years of Jesus' life before his public ministry begins. Then in episode 29, we transition into Jesus' public ministry, and don't focus on the details, but have a broad overview and discuss Jesus' teaching, healing, and growing popularity, as well as the amazement of the crowds who heard him. And it sets up the narrative that will carry through the rest of his ministry, how that time period goes through that. So that's episode 29. Episode 30, we entitled it, Let's Try That Again, because that was our first technical glitch episode where we had to re-record it. Remember? Yeah. It got lost or broken or something. I don't remember what. So that episode reviews Jesus' life and teaching, focusing on his words and actions, healing, preaching, and calling the disciples. We talk about what happened to John the Baptist and the way
his kappa was detated.
His kappa was detated. The Gospels present Jesus' ministry, and then we use that episode to recenter on the main thread of the story before we continue forward. So we're focusing in on Jesus. And then in episode 31, that is what is called the Passion Week or Holy Week, the last week of Jesus's life. The Peter's denial, the prayer in Gethsemane, the betrayal by Judas, and sets up the crucifixion. Okay. And then in episode 32, which we entitled Been Drinking as a reference to Pentecost, but we discussed Jesus's arrest, trial, and crucifixion, as well as the resurrection appearances, the road to Emmaus story where Jesus reveals himself, explaining the scriptures to his followers. And then we talk about how that event transforms the disciples from fear to boldness.
Yeah.
Then episode 33 was titled From Stephen to Meatloaf.
From Stephen to
Meatloaf.
Meatloaf. Let me just comment, though, as we're doing a recap, and people that may not be as familiar with this podcast, we're talking about history. So as a Christian believer, this is history. This is the story of Jesus. And this is our belief of history as who Jesus was and is and his life. So that's why we're going through the Bible as our chronological order of history.
I think the thing, and I think we talk about this in the orientation or whatever we call episode 1. What ends up happening when you're sitting here in 2025 or even a few hundred years before that, what happens in Europe shapes the world. English is now the international language. Capitalism, we have a global market economy. Okay. So what is called Western civilization ends up shaping all of the world. The roots of Western civilization are in Christianity. So we go back and start at the beginning of the Christian story.
Yeah.
With creation, because Jesus was a Jew, it's a carry on from that. But once we get to where there is written history, we're adding that back into the story because it's all part of what God's doing throughout history. So it's kind of like you look at where we are now to trace the thread back, and then we're telling the story forward.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why we're spending some time on Jesus and who he was and what his message was and what happened to his people after he was crucified and resurrected, because that becomes the root of what becomes the civilization that we have now. Now, you might argue with that, and that's fine, but listen to it and see what you think.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of doing history through the eyes of faith, is to understand the roots of where we came from. So in Stephen to Meatloaf, we're now discussing the early church, which is in the book of Acts, chapters like 5 through 7. It's what
How did we get the name? Are you going to go there and let me know?
I don't remember. Go back and listen to it. It was something.
It had to do with Meatloaf, the artist.
Yeah, there was some line from his song or something that comes up in the discussion. See, we forget.
Yeah.
But go back and listen. I remember it being funny, but so
I want to also comment the fact that Jesus' life was up to 33 years, right?
Right.
And we're episode 33, telling the story from his life on.
Yeah. So
That's
very interesting. So this is the early church, and Stephen was one of the first martyrs, really the first recorded martyr. But and Paul, who was then named Saul, who becomes Paul, was present at Stephen's martyrdom, was involved, not just present, was involved. Okay. So we start talking about how persecution begins to spread the message beyond Jerusalem. The next episode, 34, is about Paul's dramatic encounter with Jesus and how this moment turns an enemy of the church into one of its greatest missionaries. Okay. That one's called Blinded by the Light. Episode 35 is focused on the gift, Merry Christmas. I think we recorded it around Christmas, but we might not have. I think we did. But the focus on the gift is the gift of Jesus, because we start with Paul's missionary journey. And so we're talking about, now that Paul has come upon the scene, he's putting the whole picture together. He's taking and he's bringing the message of Christianity to the Gentiles, to the non-Jewish people. So there's a lot about that. And it's not Paul's theology, but the theology that God gives Paul, that Paul preaches and teaches, that ends up really shaping the church, okay? Giving those early guidance to the church. And I'm thinking it's episode 35 where we get really clear about what the gospel is. It's either 33, 34, 35. So go back in there, and I really encourage
What's
folks.
episode 36 called?
35 is called Focus on the Gift, Merry Christmas. 36 is What About the Mandates? You can imagine when we recorded that.
Yeah.
That has a little pop culture right there, but it's because
35 would have been the message of Christ. I'm just based
Right.
on the title of 36.
I think so too.
35 is when we talked about that.
Yeah, I think so too. So 36 is what about the mandates? And there we're talking about the Jerusalem Council and what that meant. And so go back and listen to it. The point being, it was the first recorded struggle in the church where we're having to decide what will we mandate and what won't we mandate. Because Judaism was a bunch of rules. Christianity is not about works, it's about grace. Works flow out of grace. All this is talked about in those episodes. And so 36 is that discussion of the Jerusalem Council. Episode 37, we entitled, We Don't Need a Nero. And this covers the persecutions of the Christians under Nero, but then goes on to talk about how Christians were blamed for, and punishments followed. And we start with, this episode's the first time we introduced Mark Noll's book, Turning Points, and start talking about the major turning points in Christian, not just in Christian history. Noll talks about Christian history. We start talking about history in general. So that's We Don't Need a Nero.
We don't need another Nero.
38 is Titus, Jerusalem, and Tenderloins. So there we get into our Tenderloin joke. We describe the Jewish revolt against Rome and then the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the second temple in 70 CE. So now we're leaving the New Testament.
Yeah.
Okay?
And that's
because
episode
38.
38.
We explain how that event scattered the church, the destruction, and created this separation between Jews and Christians and also caused great growth in the Christian church. So that's episode 38. 39 is I Had a Dream, which introduces the book of Revelation, talking about John's dream, okay, and how what goes on with that. And we also talk about Turning Points. The book Turning Points by Mark Noll is going to be used as a framework for the next stage of the podcast going forward. Now, I just want to go back. I'm not going to go back. This is a reminder. ChatGPT did all this work summarizing things. So as I did not go back and reread the notes and listen to all 149 episodes. So there could be some of this that is a little ChatGPT colored, okay? That is not exactly on par. But the reason that we're doing this whole review is if somebody's joining us just now, this will be an episode we could say, hey, go back, check out 150, part 1, 2, 3. If it ends up being 3 parts, which is what we're thinking, then you'll be caught up. You'll kind of see. So it's not just, I don't want this and you have to hold me accountable. I don't want it to be just a list of we did this, we did this, we did this. How is the thread being added to? How is the story being added to? What are we telling here, okay? So now we're talking about the tensions between the Roman world and Christianity. And then in episode 41, it's called Bishops, Creeds, and Cookies. But this is where we get into that concept of episcopacy, the rise of the episcopacy, which has to do with bishops and how they organize the church. So this is a lot of stuff. I have lots of people say to me, well, I don't know that much about the early church. Jump into episode 40, episode 41, because you're going to get, remember, creeds and
the Apostles'
councils.
Creed, the Nicene Creed.
We talk about canon.
Nicaea.
Do you remember this? Canon, creed, and council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're getting into
those
that.
Those are the triplets that were. I remember I was in middle school with those 3 guys.
Okay,
Canon,
so
creed.
he's getting a little silly. Episode 42 is Walking with the King, the Apostolic Fathers, and the Memphis Mafia. Remember that?
Yep.
And
boy, we were getting really creative with titles back then.
Yeah, you were.
I was. I was getting real creative with
it was
titles.
Apostolic Fathers. Okay, so those are the early
those
church
are the guys
leaders.
Like, hey, I don't think we're going to do that in this time. Okay.
So I think this is interesting how Chat summarized this right here. The episode shows how their writings, early church father writings, reveal a church still close to its beginnings, but already developing structure and doctrine.
Yeah.
It's important for you guys to know that didn't just like get invented late in the story. That early on, the church is struggling with how do we organize? What are our doctrines? And
now, is this where? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. Ask the question.
Is this where the Orthodox Church?
No, we're not that far off yet. We're not to that point in history yet.
But how far is it?
we have one church here. There's no splitting going on, and there's no head of that church. We're just coming out of the gate with the Holy Spirit and Jesus.
We're not far away
we
from
got
it, though.
some doctrine written down by Paul, and we're going, what do we do now? And so that's what this is about. These are the people who actually walked with Jesus, and then the people who walked with those people who walked with Jesus, writing things down, starting to put things together.
So we're around 100, 200?
First and second century CE. Exactly right that, okay? Episode 43, a rebel empire within the empire. And so that title comes up. We like Star Wars frequently. That title comes up because the Christian movement is growing so strong within the Roman Empire that it is seen as a threat. So emperors, some of them, are choosing to try to stamp that threat out, right? And so there's discussion about that in episode 43. And episode 44 is called A Bad Idea, ? Which is the 3rd and 4th century. Now, ChatGPT seems to be saying that we're talking about Arianism and other theological controversies. I don't know if we did right there. I'm not sure about that, but maybe we did, but I'm not sure about that. I know it comes up later on, but in episode, I think the bad idea was it a bad idea for Constantine and for Constantine to take, once Constantine became a Christian, how does that change the relationship with the church and state? Now that the leader of the state is a Christian, when throughout history, certainly to this point and after this point, whatever the faith of the leader is what everybody goes along with. Okay.
Right.
So that's a big change from being this group that's causing this undercurrent because they're faithful in serving another Lord and they're all about Jesus and sharing Jesus's love and his message and the gospel of grace and forgiveness of sins. And now the emperor says, okay, I agree. I'm in on that. And I'm a believer now. And then so now it's cool to be a believer. When before that happened, it wasn't. So we're talking about that in 44 and in 45 with the Emperor's New Groove. Okay. And we talk about Constantine then moving the capital of the empire to Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. So that's a big shift because now the capital's no longer in Rome. Okay. Then in episode 46, we get to Homoousius.
Homoousius. This is a theological term.
So now we're talking about, we walked through the Council of Nicaea, which is 325, and explaining the Arian controversy and the debate over the nature of Christ. And then we unpack that term of the same substance, which is homoousius. And it's not a deep thing. There is a couple of councils in the early church that everybody is in agreement about, and Nicaea is one of those, okay? And then episode 47 is It Is What It Is. And that explores Constantine's successors assumed a closer relationship between the church and state. And here we discuss the implications of imperial involvement in church life and theology. And we keep on discussing that for the rest of the podcast.
Yeah.
We're dealing with that right now. Right now in history.
You mean in 2025?
Right this week in American history, there's a lot of discussion about the relationship of church and state.
Right.
Okay, so go back. This is not a new song.
We can go back 1900 years.
Yes, and so if you're fascinated or even caught up in that debate, I heavily encourage you to go back and listen to some of these episodes because it's laying the roots for, it's beginning that discussion. It is not a new discussion. Okay, so that is the 4th and 5th centuries. Okay, so now we're kind of moving out of that, and what happens in the 4th century into the 5th is what in history class that a lot of people will call the fall of Rome. All right. We don't talk about it. We've actually got an episode coming up at episode, well, it's a little bit wild down the road. Where is it? Rome didn't fall, y'all. It's still about 10 episodes away. But in episode 48, we're called Visigoths, Vandals, and Attila. Oh my. And this is starting to deal with the barbarian invasions. Barbarian only means non-Christian, really, or non-civilized. But who decides what's civilized? One civilization looks at another one and says they're not civilized, right? So these are people from the north starting to invade the Roman Empire and how Rome is dealing with that and how that it affects the movements of the Western Church as these things are starting to happen.
I have to ask this. When in these early centuries does the Christian church define itself? And there's some councils, there's some meetings, there's some conversations where there becomes kind of a split in the Christian faith. I'm going back to the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay. About when is that? Because the more you say, the more I think we're not there yet. Like, what century did that happen?
It's happening. Well, that's not true. It's starting to happen now.
In 300.
The things, the first thing that causes some tension is Constantine moving that capital to Constantinople. We got to rethink, because Rome has always been the head of the church and the head of the state.
Right.
Okay. So now, and then it just gets played out over time. It's not if you ask somebody, when did the churches officially split? They're going to tell you 1062 or 1054, or that's 700 years later. But we explain as we go through how that you see what the split's about and how it is gradually happening. Right now, there hasn't been how do I say this? Today, the Orthodox Church holds to the councils. The Orthodox Church holds to these same councils that the Catholic Church still holds to. It's not later. It's after where we are right at this minute, when there's councils that they don't both still hold to today.
Got it.
Okay. But that's even then not considered the official break. There's all these little breaks. Okay.
I just want to get it in my head before every time you gave me a recap, I was thinking it was coming up.
Yeah, Visigoths, Vandals, and Attila is about the invasions of those groups, okay? And we connect the fall of Rome in 410 to the pressures these groups are putting on the empire. So that's more history there. And then episode 49 is Bishop to Rook 4. And I'm pretty sure this is the story about Leo and Attila. Because we talked about Attila the Hun and
Pope Leo.
Yeah. Okay. And then, and that's a cool story. Go back and listen to that. And then book them down.
That was 48?
Yeah. 49.
49.
Episode 50, we have fun.
Yep.
Reviewing and talking and blending serious history with lighthearted conversation.
Yep.
That's episode 50. And we named that one Bookem Dano, because that has to do with...
Guess what? For marker, we're about halfway through this episode, and we've covered 25 episodes.
Right, so that's good. We're on track. We're on track.
Yeah.
Episode 51, Gezeric silently nodded. I don't know if it's Gezeric. How do you say it? He's king of the Vandals. And this talks about the sack of Rome in 455 and how that effectively ended the Roman Empire. And then here's a key sentence. The conversation shows, talking about our conversation, how the church became a stabilizing presence during the political collapse. This is the piece of history that I never learned until I started researching this and teaching this.
Okay.
And I think we credit Paul Johnson, who is a history guru, and the name of he's written several really big, thick history books, and I can't remember. I think it's called The History of Christianity, the one we were using for this. But he's the one, when I started studying him, that I realized when Rome started pulling out of all of these distant spots of the empire, because they couldn't sustain and listen to the episodes to find out why they couldn't sustain their presence there, people looked to the church, because the church was seen as holding authority with Rome, and therefore that was the only stability left. When the soldiers are leaving the church. So that plays a huge role in the shaping of Western civilization.
Yeah.
Okay. Go back, hear that, listen to that. But
51,
the point.
Episode 51.
Yeah. 51. So 52 is about Augustine, and he is one of the first. He's somebody that we still talk about and study today. And he lived from 354 to 430 CE. So what is that?
83 years.
1,700 years ago?
Yep.
And we're still studying him today?
Yeah, God of man, God of...
City of God,
City of
Man.
City of man.
City of God was the name of... Yes, there we go. The episode, his two books, we talk about Confessions and the City of God. and we highlight how Augustine shaped Western theology for centuries to come. Then episode 53, I like this one because it's different, and we kind of jump out of all this talk about Rome and that part of the world, and we jump to St. Patrick. It's called Shamrock.
We jumped all the way to St. Patrick?
But he lived from 385 to 492. So
Wow.
he's right on the timeline, but he gets sent as a missionary.
Way up north.
Yeah. And he's from England, gets kidnapped by he's from Ireland, gets kidnapped by the Anglo-Saxons, I think. Go back, listen to it. I don't have all the details right. But it's a cool story that you don't often hear about Patrick, who was really an early church evangelist, right?
Very early, yeah.
Episode 54 is Calgon, Take Me Away, which is the Council of Chalcedon. Chalcedon. Yeah, Calgon, Chalcedon. Has a CH in it. I always pronounce it wrong. Which talks about the Council of Chalcedon clarifies the teaching on Christ's two natures, fully divine and fully human. And we explain how the council built on the Council of Nicaea and became the cornerstone of Orthodox Christianity. So up to this time, everybody's still on the same boat, but they're having theologically they're on the same boat, but they're having a little bit of that might not be 100% true. Go back and listen. They're having a little bit of difference on how things are organized, okay? Because what's going to start happening here, if we've probably already talked about it in some of these episodes and it's just didn't make the notes, but the Bishop of Rome, we talk about bishops from different places. You learn about all that. The Bishop of Rome begins to call himself the Pope and wants to assert authority over all the other bishops. And that's one of the things that the Eastern Church, the church that was headed in Constantinople, did not get into. So that's also a big thing that's starting this split. Okay. They have a there's a word for it that's not coming to me, but a group, their leaders are called patriarchs instead of called bishops over in the East. And they're always first among equals. They might have somebody who's running the group, but he's first among equals. Mm-hmm. Whereas over in Rome, the Bishop of Rome, AKA the Pope, is saying, I have the keys given to me by Peter. Like,
yeah.
This is it. So all of that is spelled out in those episodes. If you don't know much about that, go back and listen to those episodes, like 50 moving forward, okay? In 55, episode 55 was called The Great Dimming. And these are the years during the 5th and 6th century after Rome's fall, so-called fall, and it's the so-called darkening of Europe after the fall of Rome. We talk about the various barbarian groups who became the rulers and the new rulers in the former lands that belonged to the Romans. And there we start digging into how the church preserved learning and became the center of stability in a fractured continent. Rome, episode 56 is called Rome Didn't Fall, y'all.
Nope.
And that's where we really start talking about the Byzantine Empire, because that's another piece of the, if you want to call it the split of the church, is that it becomes a separate empire. The Roman Empire continues in the East. And we look back on it and call it the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire. But at the time that it was happening, it was called the Roman Empire. And what was happening in the West, there was not a Roman Empire, okay? Until Charlemagne, and then he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. And that's in 900, and we're not there yet in this line of stuff. So it all fits together. You think, oh my gosh, 150 episodes. Why does it take that long to tell that story, right? But it all fits together. It really does. There's a lot of intricate pieces, okay? So it shows in episode 56, we reframe the narrative and show that much of Rome's legacy survived and shaped medieval Europe. Okay, so even though there wasn't a Roman Empire in the West, the legacy that came from that is still shaping medieval Europe through the church. Episode 57 is Hey, Hey, It's the Monks. And we start talking about...
Big fan of the monks.
We start talking about the rise of monasticism. And the thing I think to put in right here, if you're trying to get the summary and the timeline, is that monasticism was a response to the... We start talking about, I don't know if we bring it up right here or later, but we begin to talk about the church of power and the church of piety. And that as the church became married to the state, as the church became a holder of civilization, as the church became very powerful, that the piety movement, that's when monasticism rises up. I'm going to pull away from that and live in solitude and live with Jesus or whatever. And so we talk about what that means, who the early monks were, and how monasticism spread. Episode 58, Cross, Book, Plow, and Pope Gregory the Great, who tries to make a lot of reforms, and he was Pope from 590 to 604. Okay.
And
now,
the Gregorian chants, didn't we play some Gregorian chants?
Yeah, I think we probably
on that
did.
episode?
Yeah. And I think another step back, big picture thing is a lot of people, a lot of history classes will tell you that the Middle Ages go from, or the Dark Ages, but we know they weren't really dark, goes from 500 to 1500. Well, now we're in 500. Okay. So this would be called early Middle Ages. So the next episode 59 is creating culture, early medieval Europe, and covers the 6th into the 8th centuries. And so we explain how the church became the translator and preserver of culture after Rome's collapse. And we describe the conversion of the barbarian tribes, the fusion of Germanic and Christian traditions, and the development of Christian Europe's distinctive character, the process of shaping Western civilization. Episode 60 is a catch-up episode where we recap the key points from recent episodes. So it's also a place if you wanted to go get like an overview.
Episode 60, a little bit overview.
We revisit the significance of monasteries, missionaries, and Christian kingship. And it serves, as a chat says, that episode 60 serves as a bridge before moving forward into the Carolingian era. What does that mean? Carolingian. Do you remember?
It's after some person's name.
Charlemagne.
Which is weird. Why wouldn't they call it the Charlemagnean? But anyway.
I think yeah, we have to go back and listen. I don't remember, but it has something to do with his surname or the previous names of ancestors or something like that. I don't know. Episode 61, Frank aptly named Funky Cold. You remember why?
Something about Medina.
And do you remember what Medina was?
A city?
Yeah. Do you remember why it was?
For a pilgrimage?
For whom?
For Islam.
We get to Muhammad. In episode 61, we introduce Muhammad from 570 to 632 CE. That's when he lived. We recount his birth in Mecca, early life and call to be a prophet, outline the beginnings of Islam. Now y'all can see if Wes puts that in, what Frank looks like when he's bored. Okay. So I'm trying to get this moving here. Okay.
I'm not bored. I got the answer right. Medina.
You did. And here's the thing.
I'm impressed.
Now we're introducing Muhammad. So if you have some Islamic questions, go to episode 61 and episode 62, because that's when we start talking about the caliphate and political ambitions of Muhammad and how that all fits together. This episode notes both the unity and divisions that shaped early Islamic history. Then in episode 63, we get to Frankish history, which explores the spread of Islam into Egypt, North Africa, Spain, and how it brought Christians, Muslims, and Jews into closer contact. We discuss the rise of the Frankish kingdom in Gaul, including Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours, which was 732 CE, which halted Muslim expansion into Europe. Okay, so that's the family of the Franks that has to do with Charles Martel, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is Charlemagne's grandfather. Okay?
You're doing great. You're doing great, Jen.
Episode 64 is Chuck the Great and a white elephant gift? ? So this is the 8th and 9th century, and this is Charlemagne, who reestablished centralized imperial rule in Western Europe. So, overview, folks. You've got the Roman Empire, which starts disintegrating in the 4th century into the 5th century. And then in the 8th to 9th century, Charlemagne shows up. And by then, we're reestablishing centralized imperial rule, and that really turns with Charlemagne. And Charlemagne ends up getting the white elephant gift, refers to a diplomatic exchange between he and the Abbasid Caliphate. He's given a white elephant. So there's a lot of fun stuff about that.
He's given an actual white
An
elephant.
absolute white elephant, which is a useless gift that it's hard to keep alive in Central Europe. So
it might be the origins of the
white elephant gift. Yes, so that's what we talk about. That episode 65
is it really though?
What was that word? Postulate that it may be. Anyway,
right.
Episode 65. The Pope makes the king an emperor, and this explains the. They give this thing. I don't even look at this name. I think chat just came up with this. Anyway, giving primacy to spiritual authority over the secular. And it's to talk about Leo putting the crown on Charlemagne, even though Charlemagne didn't really ask for it.
Yeah, but it's just basically stating, well, since I'm more important than you.
Right, I'm going to crown you. Yeah. Because this makes me the Pope.
Yeah.
Because I'm crowning the emperor. Right? And so he's getting power by looking like he's giving Charlemagne power, right? Mm-hmm. But that is the beginning of the Holy Roman Emperor. There's a little glitch in there in the next couple hundred years, but then it shows back up and stays around until well into the 20th century.
Okay.
Which is pretty curious, right? I think that's right. Yeah. The King, Your Grace.
The King, Your Grace.
Episode 66, The Rise of Monarchical Institutions.
Yeah.
And that's in the 8th century. And so we use resources from religion and the rise of Western culture to trace the evolution of monarchical institutions in Europe between 400 and 1000 CE. That sounds so much bigger than what we did. I'm not sure what we did, but that sounds really big. So explain how the Germanic, Roman, and Christian traditions merged into form a new understanding of kingship. I do remember that. The conversation shows how monarchy became both a political and spiritual office, laying groundwork for the medieval synthesis of church and state. Did you hear that? The medieval synthesis of church and state. Now, it is the medieval, it's what happens in the Middle Ages, but the state and religion had always been married throughout history. Okay. So it's worth a listen to understand that. And then episode 67, St. Gus inspires Al and Chuck.
St. Augustine inspired Charlemagne and
Alcuin. Remember you liked him?
Alcuin.
Alcuin was Charlemagne's right-hand man that was the teacher and the guy he leaned on for information. That didn't sound right. The guy that was his teacher and mentor and taught him about Christianity, taught him also how to read and write and all this kind of stuff, okay? And we talk a little bit about Carolingian minuscule, which was a print and typeface that came up at that time. Very interesting.
Okay? And where are we in episodes?
We're on episode 67, and this is the 8th and 9th century, okay? Episode 68, I Can Show You the World. Angie and Frank reflect on how ancient philosophy and science were largely lost in the West after the fall of Rome. Drawing from Johnson's History of Christianity, they note that monks in this era saw themselves as cultural carriers, not creators, faithfully transmitting the knowledge they had inherited. The episode emphasizes how this period was about preservation, not innovation, laying the foundation for later intellectual renewal. I remember us talking about that. Preservation, not innovation. And then episode 69, Veneer, Vikings, and Minuscule, which was the 8th and 9th centuries. And I think that's where we got to the minuscule. Sometimes Chat GPT goes and grabs things that are similar to what it's reading in my notes, but doesn't.
That's okay. We're getting what we need.
Anyway, so this is really about how the Viking raids are starting up. And they're putting pressure on the empire. And then we talk about benefits of Charlemagne's era there too. And I don't remember there's a cool thing that goes with veneer that's not coming back to me, but there was a cool quote in episode 69 that had to do with veneer, which is like a fake finish put on top.
Okay.
But there's something better underneath.
Listeners should go figure that out and let us know what that means.
I remember that. Episode 70 is entitled Shavo. Do you remember what that word means?
Shavo? Is
Italian
it a clothing
word.
line?
Italian, S''Ciavo. Slavery. Slave.
Wow.
It means slave. And so we talk about the Viking slave trade, which was like a new thing to both of us to hear about all of this. Now, slavery's been going on throughout history. And we mentioned that several times in several episodes. But this is the first time we really dive into it and spend some time on it in episode 70, because the Vikings are actually going and kidnapping people in Northern Europe and then trading them with the Muslims down on the Mediterranean. And that it was a big, huge slave trade. So a lot is talked about there. And we look into the origins and meaning of the word slave in episode 70. Episode 71 was entirely spent on Queen Elizabeth. And we entitled it A Simple Christian Soul. It was about the funeral and committal of her, because there were things that happened in that service that tied directly back in to episodes we had already seen, where you can really see the relationship and the history of the church in the state. So we spent a lot of time, and so that's a cool episode too.
And what was the years of her life? Do you remember? Obviously,
she became queen in the 1940s.
1940s?
No, maybe she was born in the 40s. No, it was not that long.
We're talking about Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Oh, because she had passed away.
Yes.
And that's how we spent a whole episode on her.
Yeah, I had watched the funeral, and there were all these ties that went with the things that we've been talking about. So we spent time talking about. Now, there might be something
that's episode
else.
71, 72?
71.
71.
Okay. 72 is controversial, y'all.
Oh, this was about the Muslims.
Yeah. So we talk about the Dark Ages happened and what was lost. So this was really about a book called Charlemagne and Mohammed Revisited or something like that. You can go back and see. And it's just this whole theory that this guy has. And I think we spend 2 or 3 episodes on it. But the legal, economic, military, we introduced feudalism, which is the cultural system that shaped medieval Europe. And then we debate when it truly began. And we talk about castles and fortifications and how society reorganized itself during this time. And then getting into episode 73, we talk about archaeological evidence, ? And that's the disappearance of papyrus. Remember, I spent a lot of time on that. And then episode 74, we go into a new light. And we're talking about revisit earlier topics for clarification, including Muhammad, Charlemagne, and the discussion about papyrus disappearing. We reflect on how these elements shape the transition from the ancient to the medieval world and offer additional insights into the challenges of the early Middle Ages. So, pretty interesting there.
I will say that from this recap, like episodes in the 50s, 60s, up early 70s of the episodes were big for me in learning about time periods that I didn't really pay attention to, learning early on, and a perspective of those time periods that I hadn't had before.
In what way?
I'm going to cough.
I'm so sorry you're coughing.
Well, the slave trade, the Vikings attacks, and how the Vikings moved up north. They were able to navigate into the rivers and up north, that people retreated from the coastlines, that the monasteries and the monks were kind of a safe place, and therefore they were preserving history, they were preserving teachings, and they became hospitals and kind of the creation of healthcare and of education. And that was all kind of happening in what we call the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, is that
it wasn't dark.
There were things happening that were sustaining civilization while there was barbaric and slavery and other things happening in the world. All of those episodes kind of talk about that and paint that picture that I hadn't really thought about.
I just thought of something as you were saying that. It's like what had been happening with humanity throughout our time here, as well as we know, has been this, I want my way and I force my way on the foreigner. I capture the foreigner, turn them into a slave, or I take over their land, or it was very much, you got to use your strength and power to have your own way. And that was happening everywhere. And so the economics of trading people and money we can make off of that. And so what's also developing then that we're looking at through this podcast over that time is the Christian worldview of love your neighbor as yourself. God wants to have a relationship with us and has provided a way through himself for us to have forgiveness of sins and to be a light in the world and to not be darkness. And so that culture, that idea, that reality is growing up in the midst of all of this, and they're intersecting. Mm-hmm. And they start intersecting way back with Noah. You know, I mean, like, or Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham, and then you get into Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. That whole story plays into the arrival of Jesus, which then spreads out among the civilized world and begins to influence all those things. And we're still, that is the past and the present.
Yeah. Still
happening. God's story is still being revealed thousands of years later. And anyway, it just blows my mind.
So I'm just looking at the sake of this episode and this time. Are we going to get up through 75?
We're there. We're there now.
We're at 75?
We're at 75 now. Well, 75 and 76 kind of go together, so I think we hit them next time.
Well, can I tell a story?
Part. Absolutely.
To wrap up?
Before you wrap up, though, what did you think about what I just said? About that playing out all the way?
I don't totally see it.
And so I encourage folks, if this is your first time with us, if you're just finding us here at episode 150, if what I just said doesn't compute with you, listen to some past episodes, however many you want to, and at least so you can understand the argument, whether you agree with it or not. So you can understand what the argument is there, because it is what we're bringing forth into the present as we continue.
I think this is a good time for this quick story.
Okay.
It has to do with the church service I attended this morning.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I say, because he's tried to tell me before. Well, we couldn't get through this story.
The message this morning, or this Sunday, was about missions, and the church that we attend, their missions and their missionaries. And several years ago, 18 years ago, they started their own nonprofit mission organization, and they've got missionaries in Moldova, and in the Amazon jungle, and in Italy. I can't think of all the places, but anyway, they had some representatives there, and they were telling stories about that and about sponsoring children and missions and things like that. But when we finished that section and we go back into a praise and worship time, they did something that I'll separate it from the spiritual part of it, because that was very impactful. But from a production standpoint, like we're talking about this podcast and producer Wes, and the production of it I was impressed and surprised, because like I said earlier before we recorded, the message was being given from a different campus with a pastor on a screen. Mm-hmm.
Which might have a tendency to make you feel excluded.
Yeah, like you're watching TV and you're not engaged. So typically when that happens and he says, "Thank y'all very much," the screen fades and the team on the stage comes up, and there might be some songs there in front of you. And they're very talented. The musicians on the stage and where I go are very talented. But as he prayed and the musicians on the stage in the room came up on the stage, the musicians on the screen where he is live at another location come up on stage, and the singers come up on the screen. And the singers in front of me in the room are on the stage. I'm like, well, this is unique. I've not seen this. How does this, I'm just from a production aspect, I'm like, this could go off the rails. Because you've got live music in the room and you've got music coming out of speakers that are broadcast in another place. Are they going to be in the same key? Are they tuned enough?
Yeah.
Like, because if this guy's live here with a guitar in G and that guy's guitar is in G, is it still going to sound right? So I'm wondering how the guy in the back is mixing this live sound. So the team on the screen began to sing, but they're singing, I'm going to get choked up. They're singing in Spanish because they're talking about missions, and they're talking about all the languages that all the believers believe that, and God doesn't just speak in English. So they're singing a praise song in Spanish, but the English lyrics are on the screen. So if you want to sing along, you can sing in English if you want, right? So they're singing it in Spanish, and the people on stage in front of us are singing it somewhat in English and some in Spanish too. But the goal is that it's in Spanish, and you're seeing the Spanish language on the screen, and this guy's singing beautifully in Spanish from another location, lead. But as we continue to sing the song, everybody switches to English, and the sound in the room becomes more prevalent than the sound on the screen, even though you can tell they're singing in English on the screen as well. And then they segue into a second song, which was mentioned earlier in the pastor's message of singing Holy, Holy, Holy.
Yeah.
And so it was just crazy how you're hearing the singers in another part of town singing live, and you're hearing the people in your room singing live, and you're hearing the people on the stage singing live. But whoever's back there producing it was mixing it so great that you forgot that they were in a separate place. And like you're seeing people on stage, and you're seeing people behind them on a screen, but everybody's singing together, and you're hearing the people on the screen. But
And
you're
were
also
you hearing two languages at the same time?
At one point, you were hearing two languages at the same time.
Which is very Pentecostal.
Well, and they mentioned that.
Of Pentecost.
Right. They mentioned that too before we got to that part of this thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just moving.
Yes.
It was moving for the sake of what they were doing, but I was also going, this is pretty amazing that this is going off without any kind of
that in and of itself could be spiritual.
Yeah, like the way the sound was coming out, and it wasn't clunky.
Yeah.
And it wasn't off key. Everybody was on the same page, and I was moved spiritually, but I also, when I walked out, I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen something go that well. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was just going back to where we were in the episodes about spreading and the message because they even said this morning that Jesus took 11 disciples because they were quoting from Matthew.
Yeah.
Go and tell and go to all nations. Anyway, so that was that.
And here we are, 2,000 years later.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yep.
So I thought that was a neat tie-in to this, and it happened today.
Super cool.
So where are we? Yeah, perfect. We've got another episode in the books. We went from episode 25 to 75. We're going to have another episode, part of 150.
150, part 3.
150, part 3. We'll probably cover 50 episodes.
Yep.
All right. Get you a snack. Thanks.
It's history through the eyes of faith, where the truth unfolds from the rise of ancient empires through the tales of saints and souls. With every word, with every tale they trace, we see the world's great story